all other business is deferred until we get to this new one, and that is the only reason that we've convened today is for this one special item. So Jeff, I hand you the floor.
Thanks, Miriam. Hey, everyone. So here, I'm just going to kind of give some background on this project, as well as kind of describe the situation that we're in today. So this project, as many of you know, are 4 large homes being built in the Palisades area on Tramonto and Ravello. The issue we're facing here is a really challenging situation because the development proposes to stabilize the hillside, but there are concerns about recent landslides and the urgency of PCH that are coming up. And so our job right now is really to gather information. I mean, my job overall is to advise the councilwoman on how to on the kind of, I guess, how to act, but also the consequences and the unintended consequences of taking certain actions. And so right now, really, we're looking at a CEQA appeal. It's for the mitigated negative declaration. And we have the opportunity right now to consider an EIR for this project, whether or not an environmental impact report is an appropriate environmental clearance for this project, given the complexities, given the controversy around this project. And so we're kind of in the same shoes as this body, the PPCC, in terms of weighing priorities, understanding what our constituents are concerned about, and really kind of balancing like the improvements along PCH, how fast we want that to be with respect to landslide safety and public safety concerns surrounding the landslide that's currently active. So we're in a phase of information collecting right now, and so that's why I'm here. That's why Michael Amster's here. I'm going to be here for the first part of this meeting to kind of answer any questions that any of you may have. Michael will be staying the entire meeting to kind of take notes and get the temperature of how we all feel about these 4 homes coming in, in the situation where we have an active landslide. I can say right now that our office has in the past taken a position of supporting the project at APC. We spoke in favor of the project because, to be honest, our position is that doing nothing is not a solution and will only exacerbate existing safety concerns. And so we do believe that taking action is needed in this case. If it were up to us, we would not have this project in particular. We would have smaller homes. We would have homes that are, that are more, in scale with the current neighborhood. But we're left with the project in front of us. And so in the past, we have taken positions in support of the project. But right now, I think that a lot has come to light, especially with the recent landslide that happened in March of this year. And so we're taking a second look at the environmental review to see if there's anything that we missed in our first review. I'm going to tell you right now that my role is to really kind of get this information to the councilwoman so that she can make a decision, having her gather information from constituents and also understanding the procedures. Like if we wanted to upgrade to a full EIR, what would that process look like? Are we talking to our city attorneys? Do we have a clear record that supports upgrading this project to a full EIR? And so these are questions that I'm currently getting the answer to. And I'm happy to kind of share with you all where we're at, our thought process. But like I said earlier, we haven't made a decision, so I'm not going to be giving any sort of stance where the councilwoman stands on this today. But I'm happy to give you the information that we have so far. And so with that, I'm going to open it up to questions. I know that, there's a lot of questions, and so I wanted to give you guys an opportunity to ask them. And I may or may not have the answer. If I don't have the answer, hopefully a presentation later from the applicant or from others, that may be on this call could help answer those questions. And so, yeah, I'll hand it back to Mary.
Thank you. I very much appreciate you being here and for bringing us up to speed as to what the council office's trajectory has been on this project. I think most people on this call probably know that you were generally supportive, and even though we called for an EIR, I think your sentiment was that the developer had already gone over most of the issues that would be brought up in the EIR and that they had either resolved for them or accounted for them. It'll be interesting to see where we are at the end of these presentations, because as you say, we will hear both from the developer and the HOA. I do have a quick question for you. One of the reasons that we called this special meeting was because there was going to be a plum meeting tomorrow afternoon. This item is actually on their agenda, but do you have a sense that that will be continued?
Yes, that would
I assume your office kind of learning more. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was wondering why it was on the agenda too, because we had agreed with the applicant that this would be continued to a date uncertain. The last day to act has been agreed upon to be July 31st of this year, and we're actually looking for a further extension because July 31st when we come back from a summer recess, and so a lot of things may be happening that week. So we may need to push it further. But because at our last meeting we continued it to a certain date, May 21st, is that that's the reason why it's on the agenda for tomorrow, is because we had stated in a previous meeting that this meeting would happen on the 21st. And so at tomorrow's meeting, our office will be speaking and requesting the continuance. And we have heard from the applicant that says that that they are agreeing to continue it to July 31st.
Okay, perfect. And then are you in touch with Caltrans? So I assume that nothing will happen on PCH, or at least no major kind of remediation of the blockage of that lane is going to happen on PCH until this is resolved. Caltrans had suggested that they would come around and restripe the road, take up a shoulder, but open up 2 lanes of traffic. Are you in touch with them, and can you help this community ensure that traffic is restored?
Yeah, so we're talking to Caltrans in terms of what our options are. They have indicated, like you said, Miriam, that this landslide is top heavy, and so the remediation would really have to happen from the top of the landslide, because if you just cleared the bottom of the landslide, you're just going to have more debris kind of fall down onto PCH. And so this is truly like a top-down approach that is needed in order to clear the landslide. So in terms of our communication with Caltrans, they've indicated that they're open to restriping the lane, or at least restriping so that the access is not as cumbersome as it is today. We have a meeting. Michael Amster has organized for a meeting with us in Caltrans, because we haven't really had like all hands on deck sort of meetings where we kind of describe the urgency of the situation. Most of it has been through emails and one-on-one calls. And so we're going to have like a larger setting meeting coming up, where we talk about our concerns about PCH, and anything that you guys want us to bring up at that meeting. Feel free to let me know or let Michael know, so that we can put in our notes.
Okay. And then I know Chris has her hand up. The developer is going to join us at 5:30, so we're going to give the floor to them. My last question for you, and if you, up to you how you'd like to answer it, or whether you'd like to wait and answer it at the end of the meeting, but you have long said that you think the developers offer to shore up the hillside, at least on their own property, as is related to their own development, is better than doing nothing, that it does in fact begin to stabilize the hillside from the top down, which is what I'm hearing everybody tell me is what's necessary. But that particular developer does not own the entire piece of land that's on top of the crest of that slide. So assuming that this developer does go ahead and stabilize the hillside beneath his property, and he does it well, there's still more hillside left, right? There's still more landslide left, I assume, to the right of his property. What about that? I mean, what about the idea that somebody like the city maybe comes along and stabilizes the entire slide versus piecing it out to various developers or landowners, property owners?
That's a really great question, Miriam. And it kind of brings us back to why we felt this project would help in the long run in the first place, because really all the location of these landslides and the remediation that needs to happen is located on private property. And so as many of you know, there was a URS report done back in 2010 that described the problem. Hey, there's an active landslide here, and it's going to cost this many $1 million, I think it was $20 million at the time, to 25 million to fix the landslide at Tramonto. The city didn't do anything, and in large part because we didn't have the money, and we still don't have the money today. And so to say that, to kind of sit back and expect the city to come in would be really negligent on our part, knowing that the city doesn't have the staffing resources or the funding to be able to pursue the remediation on our own. And so what we're doing is really relying on the private property owners to do their part on their property to remediate the landslide. And you're right, Miriam, like there are concerns that, well, if you're just going to, stabilize this portion, but not that portion, like how does that deal with the overall stabilization of the neighborhood? And that is one of the kind of the gaping questions that we have right now, because they are limited in the work they can do. They can't just start doing work on somebody else's property, right? I think given the opportunity to, they may, but right now they don't have access to other people's property in order to do the remediation on their land. So it's interesting to understand their the developers' constraints in that they're limited to their private property, the city's constraints in that we don't have the money or resources to put into repairing the landslide, and also kind of the needs of the neighborhood to have Tramonto and Ravello, more accessible, and the improvements that would come with this project. And so, in terms of where the developer is, they are doing work only on the lots that they own, which is a lot, actually. We want this work to be done. Something is better than nothing, but you're right in that the impacts on adjacent lots is still undetermined. And so, that's still a big question mark for us.
Right. And just to make clear, the entire top of the slide is privately owned, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Chris Spitz and then Joanna Spack.
Hi there. Hi, Jeff. So for everyone on this call who doesn't know, I'm the at-large rep, meaning I represent both property owners, including this one, and all the residents. We have to do a balancing act. Now, my questions are these. There was a lot more, but I'm just going to try to make it quick. So if Traci, or excuse me, the councilwoman, ultimately ends up saying, yes, an EIR should be required, let's say she even says, and I don't know if this is possible, if it could be focused on the geology, which I think is everyone's concern, geology, construction and hauling, that kind of thing. But if that were to occur, this has to ultimately go through city council. So is that something that the city council would defer to her opinion about this? I'm assuming that's true, but maybe you could let me know. And the second question is, I'd like to know the status of the coastal development permits. I know they were granted in the prior process. I don't know if there's been an appeal, and if so, is that pretty much stayed pending what happens with the environmental? Those are my questions.
Good questions, Chris. So regarding the coastal permit, that had already been appealed to the APC. APC heard it, denied the appeal, and so locally we've granted them a coastal development permit. It still has to go through the Coastal Commission, though, and I suspect that the Coastal Commission will have a lot of problems with this project because, they're introducing like 300 plus piles into the existing landform, which is a big no-no if you read Chapter 3 of the Coastal Act. And so they're going to have a really difficult time, I think, going through coastal. And so part of our office's kind of, balancing act or consideration is that, well, maybe on a CEQA perspective, they have enough analysis going on, but from a Coastal Act perspective, if we were enforcing the Coastal Act, or when this project goes to coastal for their in front of their commission, that there can be that in terms of Chapter 3 of the Coastal Act, there's definitely an argument that this project would not comply given the amount of permanent structures going into the hillside. And so we have the CDP piece, the coastal piece, and we also have the CEQA piece. And in regards to like the procedure of how it would happen, let's say Councilwoman Park decides, hey, we want this to be upgraded to an EIR. What's going to happen is that she's going to make a recommendation to Plum saying, hey, I recommend that Plum require the applicant to file for an EIR. Plum can either say yes or no to that recommendation. And then whatever they say, assuming that they say yes and they defer to Councilwoman Park, then that decision goes up to council, and then council would have to adopt that decision. And if they do, then the applicant goes ahead, files for the EIR, goes through all the analysis, right? And then after the EIR is done, then back to the APC, it was the last decision. And then the previous entitlements, including the CDP, the SPP, specific plan clearance, and all the entitlements that came before, they would kind of need to be considered in light of the new environmental document, which is the EIR. And so that's the whole process in terms of what needs to happen if this were to go, if this were to be upgraded to an EIR.
Okay, thank you very
And
much.
then I think, Jeff, you had told me that would be that, well, we can leave it at that. Just the length of that process would be at least about a 6-month process time, right?
Yeah, 6
Okay.
months because.
Okay. Okay, and then Joanna still has a question. Go ahead, Joanna.
Yeah, going back to who owns the properties in the path of the slide, in looking at a couple of online databases, government databases, it shows that the city owns several properties within the landslide itself, including one at the very top. Is that not true?
That is true, yeah.
Okay. Would the city be willing to remediate the slide on their property in addition to what the developer is doing?
Well, currently the strategy for the city is to sell those properties to the developer or anyone that hopes to develop on the hillside, so that they can do the remediation with respect to whatever project they're building. And so that's currently what the city is trying to do, because kind of like this piecemeal remediation that would happen if the city were to take over. We talked to BOE about the feasibility of it, and they just it just seemed like that wasn't in the cards. And so when the developer has their chance to speak at this meeting, I think they have a more thorough analysis of which parcels are their property and which are not, and they have a really good diagram that shows the stabilization that they're proposing and the stabilization that wouldn't be occurring because it's on others' lots. And so that would be a great question to ask the developer in terms of how, which lots are theirs, which lots belong to the city, which lots they intend to purchase from the city, because I know that they do intend to purchase some lots from the city, and what their plan is to remediate, their lots that are in their ownership.
Okay, and do you know, like, in terms of Caltrans removing the toe of the slide, they want the hillside stabilized first. Is what the developer's planning on doing, will that be enough for Caltrans, or do they want more than that?
That's a great question, and that's what we're going to discuss at our all hands meeting with them, to ask these questions, like, what is the threshold of improvement the city needs to do in order for you guys to take over PCH improvements, right? That's the big question that we have for them. We don't know that threshold yet, but yeah, that's on our mind.
Excellent. Thank you, Joanna. All right, Marcia Vogler and then Michael Lyle. And then I think at that point, we will probably have, we have the developer on now. So let's take those last two questions and then we'll hand the floor over to the developer. So Marcia and then Michael, and let's try to be quick about question and answer. Thank you.
Thank you this is Marcia Vogler. My question is, Jeff, you just said that that there are still lots available, but so far that lots that have been sold to the developer from the city have not been put on the up for sale to the public. They've been done without competing bids. How do we deal with that if somebody wants to make a competing bid?
From what I understand, there is a procurement process or a bidding process or auction process for these lots. So I can get back to you, Marcia, on that process, because how I understand it is that because it's listed as one of the city's surplus property, that it has to go through all of this like due diligence and a procedural matters in order for it to be sold. And I understand that right now it's still, it's still pending a sale. And so Marcia, get back to you.
Yeah, I would absolutely very much like an answer to that, because there have definitely been people that have been interested in making competing bids, and then we find out that the properties have been sold and nobody even heard about it. So please get back to me when you can. I appreciate that.
Yeah, can you send me an email after this? So that
I will. I'll send it to you. Absolutely.
Thank you, Martha. That was important. Thank you. And
Thank
Michael, And then that'll be the last question, and I'll introduce the developers. Did we just lose the questioner? Michael Lyle, did you have a question?
He did. He had his hand up and he's muted.
iPhone 118. All right. So I'm going to ask all iPhones without an identity to just identify themselves, and then I'm going to hand it over. All right. So Michael, we're going to defer your question until afterwards, just so you all know. I think for the next two presentations, when we have the developer and then the homeowners association, they will take up the entire half an hour, perhaps. But we will have Q&A at 7 o'clock or at 6:30 when we begin discussion. So at this point, I would like to introduce on the call Greg Demas and Tony Russo. Thank you both for joining us. I will hand the floor over to you since it's 5:32. I'll let you make your own introductions. You are the developers for the proposed construction that's going up on the top of the Tramonto slide, and you know what the story has been. You know the narrative that came before this moment. And again, I thank you for joining the PPCC to make these presentations and take some questions. So welcome, Greg and Tony.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much. So I think we'll just get right into it. Since we have a limited time.
I'm going to
here.
give you share screen.
So thank you so much. Let me know when that's ready.
Both of you? And I think Doug Himmel is also from your office, right?
No, but we have is Kevin on, Craig?
I think we have the geologist who's supposed to be joining Miriam.
Okay, I'll keep an eye on the,
But
wait. Also, just for secretarial purposes, I want to make sure that I have noted that both Jenny Lee Jenny Lee, our treasurer, is on the call. And there's someone else who logged in. I'll have to note
I
that.
think Haldis is here too.
Yes, Haldis, thank you. Oh, and also another voting member. Anyway, okay, go ahead. Thank you.
no worries at all. So hello PPCC members. The following is a presentation of the Tramonto Ravello project and the key details about the history and scope of the project. As a brief summary, the project proposes to construct 4 new single-family homes across 12 lots along the Tramonto and Ravello Drive in the Castellammare Mesa area. We hope the takeaway from this presentation is that the project, although large in scale, is a net benefit to the community and stakeholders. We wanted to open up, there we go. We wanted to open up this presentation with a comment that one of our area planning commissioners with the city, Commissioner Margulies, made at the last hearing that we had, that we really wanted to highlight about our project when she said that it's in no one's interest to do nothing here. So a project is really necessary to make these sites in particular safe. And we believe that our proposed project today addresses those concerns that the community has, while adhering to the broad aspects of the Coastal Act, which we must adhere to as we are in the coastal zone. So for some context, all of the proposed development sites are located within the Tramonto landslide, and the city requires that the project must remediate the landslide per code to ensure the safety of the development in the area. To be clear, we cannot do nothing here. We can't simply do nothing. The only way to address the geological hazard and address the orders to comply, which will be discussed later, is to perform construction. So around the late 1960s, Tramonto Drive was restored to its pre-landslide condition through the construction of a bulkhead shown here in pink that was later reinforced in 1981. We discussed that after a site visit conducted by Public Works in 2021, city engineers concluded that the bulkhead and tieback system appear structurally sound based on their professional recommendation. Although Tramonto Drive is stable, the landslide mass below continues to slide onto PCH, and in the beginning of this year created a 1-lane pinch point, which not only has severe traffic impacts, but also impacts the fire and life safety. So as the project team developed our plans to address this specific landslide and our portions of it, The engineering is what ultimately dictated this design. We reviewed various alternatives, a few of which are shown here, proposed by the project to minimize alteration of landform while at the same time assuring stability and structural integrity and minimizing risk to life and property. So there's this balancing act within the coastal zone. These included methods to reduce grading and protect the devices. So next slide. Ultimately, the project proposed the 4 residences on piles that will stabilize the landslide highlighted here and achieve the required factors of safety that the city requires. The project will include the export and removal of approximately 30,000 cubic yards of this landslide debris, shown here in orange, which amounts to approximately 70 million pounds of mass that will not be a driving force on the landslide material to the south. Installation of an extensive subdrainage system on the site will appropriately capture and direct the overwhelming majority of water from seeping into the landslide and direct that water away to the city-approved storm drain device on Ravello that will also mitigate erosion to the hillside. The homes will be supported by over 300 piles that will be driven into and supported by competent bedrock below the landslide mass. This means that the homes will not add any weight whatsoever to the landslide mass. And currently, the landslide mass is this driving force that is pushing soil down the slope and towards PCH. Our stabilization system will be providing a resisting force that is 1.5 times greater than the driving force, a 1.5 factor of safety, that ensures the stability of the slope within the metes and bounds of our property. Just to give you some context as to what we're doing here. The following slide shows the northernmost edge of the landslide adjacent to the Tramonto Drive bulkhead. As a part of the project, we're removing a critical portion of the landslide debris in this location and replacing the landslide material adjacent to the bulkhead with a pile-supported retaining wall within the public right-of-way. This top-down approach allows the landslide to be remediated to an adequate factor of safety per building code. And Greg will be describing this at the end a little bit more. From this northernmost extent to the southern boundary of our lots. As a community benefit, and we'll go over this later, we're also proposing a new sidewalk along the full extent of Tramonto Drive, even outside of our frontage. We also want to make really clear that the Tramonto roadway was never any wider than it is today. The current bulkhead supports the same width of the roadway that has existed since 1940 at least, and since the area was developed. It is therefore unlikely for the city to perform any work to remove the landslide debris adjacent and south of the bulkhead within the public right-of-way. However, this will be a part of our project, as we just previously showed. We also wanted to highlight that the project will be managed effectively throughout the construction. The team prepared a detailed traffic management plan that was conducted to analyze construction staging, parking, and phasing throughout the construction process for the whole development. These are just simply the plan exhibits that were a part of that plan, which was approved by LADOT. And we are happy to discuss any specifics of this plan that the PPCC might have. Just for time purposes, we're just summarizing it. The following slides will outline some of the key aspects of the project that were modified over the course of this lengthy review to address neighborhood concerns. Please note that some of these changes will be captured in later sections, but not everything is, so we're happy to address questions later on. A large concern of the appellants at the first hearing was the proposed driveway for the Tramonto property was located within the public right-of-way. So shown here is that original driveway proposal. Although we in the city assured the appellant that this driveway would not preclude the ability of the city to improve the bulkhead or even widen the roadway in the future, the applicant took this time to redesign the project in an effort to address this concern. So shown here is the final design change and the current design change that involved constructing a 9-foot wide driveway entirely within the property lines of the Tramonto home. We will still be proposing a ramp down in order to provide alternative access for the city, remove the landslide debris as we mentioned, and support the bulkhead. This option allows for the city to utilize the full right-of-way along Tramonto Drive while allowing the project site access to its required off-street parking space. Final option will not block any view to the coast, as the project will remain below the street elevation of the Tramonto roadway, just like the initial project. The CMHO also agreed that this direction is preferable to access the site and appreciated the efforts made by our team to address this issue. Project is also voluntarily proposing to enhance the visual quality of the area by agreeing to construct a minimum 4-foot wide sidewalk with new guardrails all along the section of Tramonto, even past the extents, like I mentioned. And please note that this will not reduce the width of the current street. The sidewalk can fit fully within the existing area between the edge of the bulkhead and this existing wooden fence shown here. Since the Tramonto project is below the street elevation of Tramonto Drive, this sidewalk will not obstruct any views to the ocean, again, as I mentioned. For the sake of time, we wanted to briefly note sort of what we did with the homes and the sizes of the homes to address community concerns regarding compatibility. These are large homes, we recognize that, but for previous hearings to the latest hearing, the Tramonto home was reduced by 1,100 square feet, or about an 8% reduction, and one of the Ravello homes was reduced by 2,000 square feet, or an approximately 15% reduction. There's the other two homes along Ravello were 9,000 and 5,000 square feet respectively. And again, we just recognize that these are large homes, but there are other homes of similar size in the area, and the size of the homes are fully compliant with the LAMC and BHO. What's important to note here is that even though we reduced the size of the homes over the course of the project, the grading did not change. It's because no matter how we push and pull the structures, the grading to remediate the landslide is still necessary, and the project has to remove a significant portion of this landslide mass. So the following slide shows a rendering of the site in situ, and then these additional images that are now populating just show other developments in the area. Again, the development will be visually compatible with other homes in the area that are large, multi-story, estate-sized homes. So, but the main kind of purpose and focus of this meeting is how the project will be improving the safety of the area. And we're happy to discuss other comments regarding the CDP and project details that may not have been touched on. But considering the time constraints, we really wanted to stress that this development, as proposed, creates major public safety benefits, and the following slides will outline each one. So before we begin, I wanted to discuss those orders to comply real quick. So the orders to comply were issued for 10 of the 12 lots, encompassing 3 of the 4 proposed homes in 1999, based on a visual inspection of the sites and the landslide debris that mandated that the owners of the site comply with the orders and remediate the landslide. Again, this was based on a visual inspection of the sites without understanding the individual property lines, because they were just out there. They didn't have, map. So although the studies were conducted on the landslide after 1999, most notably URS in 2010, no project has ever been proposed to address these orders and stabilize the landslide until our proposed project that was submitted in 2019. And these orders were subsequently updated by LIDBS to reflect the current owners. So during the preparation of the soils report for the CDP case file and review of the geotechnical characteristics of the landslide, it was identified that the landslide mass encompassed the 4th home site, approximately 5,000 square foot home, at 1717523 and 17529 Ravello. So although the orders weren't updated to include that site, the fact remains that this same landslide debris resulting from the same slope failure exists, and the city is requiring that we need to remediate it to the satisfaction of the grading division. So in summary, really, the totality of the project site is within the landslide mass, and the city has mandated that the overwhelming majority must be remediated to address the slope failure. Again, in other words, it's in no one's interest to do nothing here or delay. So safety benefit number 1 is this pile-supported retaining wall, which we discussed earlier. So the project is proposing to replace existing disturbed landslide material that is currently providing unknown support abutting the bulkhead with laboratory tested high strength concrete that will provide much more certain and long-term lateral support to the bulkhead in this area, thereby improving the bulkhead and simply increasing its lifespan. This is a public benefit that will improve safety. It's also just simply necessary as we have to remediate the landslide from the northernmost edge to the southernmost edge. And again, Greg will describe that in later slides at the end. And then as shown before, we're proposing a new sidewalk for the full extent of Tramonto Drive, which will greatly improve pedestrian safety for the area, as many people still traverse this section of Tramonto by foot. And then regarding drainage control, safety benefit number 3, The project will manage the water runoff away from the landslide, which is a huge safety benefit to the community. So when it rains, water currently that falls within the project boundaries infiltrates into the landslide, which is a hazardous existing condition. Water seeping into a landslide will weatherize the soil such that the strength of this material becomes significantly weakened and also saturates the soil substantially, thereby increasing the overall weight felt by the landslide, which again is that key driving factor that causes landslide events. It pushes it further down. As a result of the project, water could instead be captured and directed to the approved above ground storm drain device that currently runs from Ravello down to PCH. So additionally, with regard to drainage, the applicant proposes to further reduce the overall amount of drainage and water currently being directed to Ravello Drive and to that storm drain device. The hydrology report that we prepared for the project identified tributary areas that includes all possible water runoff that currently is and would ultimately be conveyed to this existing storm drain pipe. The calculations performed have confirmed that the existing storm drain pipe can adequately accommodate all of the drainage from not just our proposed project, but also all of these existing tributary areas, and has more than adequate capacity based off this study. So regardless, as a means of addressing community concerns regarding drainage and just water in general going to this pipe, the applicant voluntarily is proposing to install a cross gutter along the intersection of Tramonto and Ravello Drive, and it would redirect as much as 50% of the existing flow going down Ravello Drive, coming from Tramonto really, and into this existing storm drain pipe, even when including the project. So just to be clear, the applicant has gone above and beyond to try to design the project and provide voluntary public improvements that will reduce the amount of water being directed towards the landslide and into the landslide. And then safety benefit number 4, as we mentioned, we're remediating an extremely large portion of the landslide debris that again has been mandated by the city. Concerns about this landslide are shared by all here, and we're trying to move forward so that something can be done about this hazardous condition that continues to move and help prevent it from creating a
Tony? I'm sorry, Tony, can you unmute yourself? Okay,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Sorry, where did you lose me?
Just about 5 seconds ago. Go ahead.
Oh, perfect. We also intend to improve emergency vehicle access and circulation to this area through Ravello Drive. So there's currently a pinch point along Ravello further down the road from the project site. And now per our engineering analysis, the roadway is adequate to support construction traffic along this narrow section. And regardless, the applicant confirmed with BOE that if any damage was to occur to the roadway as a result of this project, that the applicant can work with the city to repair the roadway and ensure that after construction, the roadway would return to its original pre-construction condition. Now, we went into the deep detail on this on the Area Planning Commission, but just in summary, we cannot widen this section due to issues with regard to parking for the resident at 17480 Ravello, who's right here, resident right there. And then we also, and that's one reason why, and the second reason why is that if we were to widen in its current elevation, we just simply can't address the drainage that is coming from that section without acquiring or having control over these vacant lots to the south of it. So just unfortunately, we just don't have the ability to widen. But what we're agreeing to is repairing and replacing this section of Ravello Drive, to its pre-construction condition, through our project, that we're not making it any worse. And what's really a benefit here, what we should be really highlighting here and what we are, is that the project will be providing a LAFD Hammerhead approved turnaround that does not exist today. The turnaround will allow emergency vehicles like paramedics, fire trucks, the ability to turn around at the end of the road when currently they just can't. They just can't at all. They have to back up or make multiple awkward turns. And it's not just emergency vehicles, trash trucks, deliveries, other large vehicles that will be able to turn around easily as a result of this project and just provides a clear community benefit. And the applicant is also willing, and we agreed to, begin work for the pile supported retaining wall abutting Tramonto Drive prior to any downslope work commencing, so that this will enable the project to direct the majority of the construction traffic up towards the wider section of Tramonto and reduce the amount as much as possible along Ravello. So all of these measures will work in concert to provide another clear safety benefit to the community, both after and during construction. And speaking of construction, many concerns were raised by nearby constituents with regard to construction impacts. Our project team worked with the council office and neighbors to create the following voluntary construction conditions that have been made conditions of approval that will ensure all construction is performed safely and will ensure transparent communication throughout the construction process. The following are some key provisions, and we're happy to discuss in more detail if needed. So in conclusion, the applicant team has spent hundreds of hours to meet with community representatives, city officials, to try to address various comments and concerns. We believe that the project has addressed all relevant comments and will be a benefit to the community, significantly improve the safety of the area. I'd like to sort of end this with summarizing all the key elements. So we'll be addressing the orders to comply and stabilizing a large portion of the landslide. Be removing landslide debris adjacent to the bulkhead, replacing it with pile supported retaining wall. Be voluntarily constructing approximately 300 linear feet of sidewalk along Tramonto, even past the meets and bounds of the property, to improve pedestrian safety and the visual corridor. The project will install a cross gutter at Tramonto and Ravello to reduce the water flow going down towards Ravello, and additionally direct water flow from the landslide. The project will construct a LAFD turnaround at the end of Ravello Drive, providing better circulation for emergency vehicles and potentially repair any damage, if needed. The project has agreed to begin construction of the retaining wall adjacent to Tramonto first to better direct construction traffic towards the wider Tramonto. And then finally, the project has agreed to many voluntary construction conditions to ensure that the construction is performed safely and transparently. We really believe that this project, including all of these measures, will serve the community for years to come, truly. And so I'm going to end my presentation, and then Greg's going to have a few talking points as well. So I wanted to end my presentation with a discussion about why the project has an M&D versus an EIR, which is kind of the topic top of mind. So to be clear, the decision of whether a M&D or an EIR is required lies solely with the LA City Planning Department. They are the lead agency making the final decisions and determinations. Planning does, however, require the applicant to analyze many different categories of environmental impacts, such as air quality, geology, traffic, biology, etc., to determine if the project has a significant impact on the environment. If there are significant impacts, but they can be mitigated, then an M&D is performed. If there are significant impacts that cannot be mitigated, then an EIR must be required. What is really key here is that the project team has done extensive studies that would otherwise be required for an EIR, such as extensive soils analysis, environmental reports, traffic management plans, and an alternatives analysis, which analyzes different ideas for what the project could be. We actually had to do that as a part of this process. And these documents ultimately concluded that there is simply no unmitigatable impact, as the elements of the project are addressing all relevant environmental concerns, especially with regard to stabilizing the landslide. Now, to go through each document would take up a whole semester, honestly, to explain, but we're happy to delve into any questions that the PPCC might have regarding this item. So with that, I'm concluding my presentation, and Greg will now discuss the kind of narrative of how we got to this point. So Greg, take it away.
Thanks, Tony. I'd like to take a moment now to discuss the importance of how and why this project came to be what it is today. What you see on your screen, Tony, you can go to the next slide, please. So what you see on your screen now is an aerial image of the Tramonto landslide area taken in 2020. The approximate limits of the landslide are denoted by the red line. I will discuss the significance of the blue and green shaded area shortly. So in 2015, I purchased 2 lots located in the middle of the landslide on Positano Road, outlined here in magenta. Tony, thank you. Over the next 2 years, my geologist and geotechnical engineer, Stoney Miller, who specializes in repairing landslides, performed a very extensive study on the Tramonto landslide to better understand how I could safely develop my 2 Positano lots. Stony Miller's study consisted of analyzing approximately 50 borings and reviewing over 100 reports prepared by the city and other nearby property owners going back over 60 years. They presented their study in a series of reports that were reviewed and approved by the city in 2017. Stony Miller's findings definitively concluded that I could not safely develop my 2 Positano lots unless the portion of the landslide on the properties directly above mine were stabilized first. At that point, I learned the only way to stabilize the Tramonto landslide would be from the top down. Shortly thereafter, I contacted every person that owned a property in this landslide to inquire about their interest and financial participation in the possible global repair of this hillside. I spoke to approximately 40 property owners over a 3-month period and quickly learned that completing a project of this scale would be impossible given the number of people that would need to rely on each other with conflicting views and uncertain financial means. At that point, I strategically began acquiring the 12 key lots shown here in blue at the top of the landslide so I could stabilize them without having to rely on any other property owner. This development proposes to do exactly that. And in doing so, the remaining 13 lots directly below, shown here in green, could be stabilized after my project is completed. I understand my project represents change that may be scary for the people in the Castellammare Mesa neighborhood, but it is important for the community to recognize the opportunity we have here, what is at stake, and the risks if we do nothing, or even further delay the project from moving forward. The proposed development will result in the stabilization of a very significant key piece of the landslide that will help protect PCH and allow other portions of this landslide to be stabilized in the future. We are asking the PPCC to support the project so we can start this chain reaction that will hopefully result in the global stabilization of the entire landslide in the years to come. I thank you for your time and for allowing us to share details about the project. We look forward to answering your questions in the Q&A session to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Greg and Tony. That was very informative, and I really appreciate all the information that was in there. I quickly have a question for you. The 300 caissons that you have identified you need for this project that are going to be bored into, I think you said concrete. Who came up with that 300? Was it the city or was it the geologist? How is it that we know that that 300 is required and safe?
Yeah, so
I can answer that. Oh, you got that, Greg.
Go ahead, Tony. And I can.
So yeah, you'll add on to it. So the 300 piles, to be clear, it's going into bedrock. So underneath this landslide map is bedrock, right? So the piles drive in, and that's what's supporting the structure. So they're made of concrete, reinforced concrete. Now, what happens is, and this was kind of back on that initial slide, this alternatives analysis of what the engineering was dictating in terms of how these projects can be designed. So like, what does it take to remediate the landslide? Just looking at that first. And so there was many different options. You can remediate the whole landslide. You can remove the landslide mass, recompact it. You can do various other engineering methods to remediate the landslide. What ultimately was determined as the most effective and also the most in compliance with the Coastal Act, which we have to also adhere to, which requires that we minimize alteration of landform, is this combination of piles and removal of some of the landslide debris, which is kind of what we discussed. And so that sort of how we arrived at that is consultation with the geologists and our engineers, preparing what we can actually do from an engineering perspective to address the orders, submitting those reports to the city, to Building and Safety Department of Grading Division, or Department of Building and Safety Grading Division, and then going through their comments, right? There were over 10 different responses. So this wasn't like a, hey, we're going to do this, you guys are okay with it, right? It was a, hey, we're going to try this, many different responses, and a huge back and forth to what we ultimately arrived at today. So this was a highly, highly analyzed development that took many, many, many months to land on. This wasn't something that was just sort of, decided by our project team. This was clear. This was very, very intentionally worked with the city on to make sure that it was addressing the orders and responding to the city comments.
Okay. All right, any
Does that answer your
questions?
question?
Yes, yes, it does. I think, you know, most of the people on this call aren't geologists. So I think it helps to conceptually understand when you say that you're going to relieve the weight that's on the landslide, you're going to have 300 caissons that go into concrete. It's good to be able to visualize that there is bedrock at some point beneath that slide and that you're going to root into it. And then I assume that the city will be checking, or there'll be a geologist that'll sort of affirm that the pylons have actually hit bedrock.
Yeah,
Correct.
so
So
I'll
you
jump-
have a deputy grading inspection, and you also have inspections from the city. But Greg, you can
Okay.
talk about that.
yeah, so
All
one
right,
of the
and
conditions.
it's 602.
One of the conditions of approval, Miriam, was requiring that the geologist, the project geologist, in coordination and conjunction with the deputy, downhole log every single one of these 300 plus piles. So that means the sequencing would be, we have a drill rig out there, it drills into the earth, it removes all of the disturbed soil from the landslide debris, it pulls it out of the hole, we drop in high reinforced steel rebar cage, we drills into the hole, the geologist goes down the hole and confirms for every single one of the piles that we are at the proper depth, and he will verify that that we are going into a certain embedment requirement below the landslide surface. He will come out of the hole, we will drop a rebar cage that consists of very high strength steel that has been designed and approved by the city, and then we will fill that hole up with concrete, right? And we will do that approximately 300 times.
Okay.
We don't go out there and drill 300 holes at once. We will drill one hole at a time. We will fill that hole, and then we will move on to the next hole.
Okay. So it's 602. I'm going to hand the floor over to the developers, but I think Chris has a question. So let's take Chris's question. Kim, I see you have a question, but I'm going to give you the floor in a minute anyway.
Hi, thanks, Greg and Tony. I think I met Tony on a call on another project a few weeks ago. I appreciate it. I think it's important information for us to hear. You probably do know this board has already passed a motion and taken a position to request an EIR in connection with the West LA APC appeal. So at this meeting, I assume the board will want to consider whether we want to continue doing that or take some other position. So that's for later on. But my question is, if an EIR is required for any reason, who would be conducting that? I presume it's an expert that you would hire. And if so, is that something, someone that has done the prior studies? Is someone new? Is it someone that we could trust? You know, because that's part of the issue here. We're not experts. We want to be able to trust what we're being told is true. I'm sure you're sincere, and I'm not questioning you at all. But you understand what I'm getting at here. Who would be doing that study if it were to be required?
Tony, you want to answer that?
Yeah, I can answer it. So yeah, we would be doing a lot of the, I guess we and the consultants that we hired would be doing a lot of the work in consultation with the city. Again, kind of what I was referencing at the end of my presentation is that the city is the lead agency. They're the ultimate decision maker when it comes to determinations and releasing of final documents. However, the city doesn't prepare the report themselves. They hire outside firms to verify what the environmental impacts are. And so all of that is sort of worked in concert with the city. So it's just like with the soils reports, right? We prepare our soils reports for the project, but it's extensively reviewed by the city and ultimately approved. It's a similar sort of fashion where it's in tandem with the government. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, it does. And I thank you.
Thank
Okay, so I am going to hand the floor to, I believe, Kimberly Federer, unless Cindy, you'd like me to hand the floor to you. Nod or shake, I can see you. Okay, so I'm going to give the floor to Kim Federer. She is the president of the Castellammare Mesa Home Owners. We refer to them as the HOA in our documents. Kim, welcome to our meeting. Welcome to everybody from the neighborhood. And I hand you the floor. You have about an hour to make your presentation. I think you had a question for the developer, but up to you if you want to defer that until later or ask it now.
Well, why don't we get started and we can handle that in the question and answer session. But first of all, I wanted to thank you for making me co-host. And I wanted to thank you for allowing all of us to present and also to be present with Council, Jeff Khau, and also the developers. I think this is very valuable for all of us. So let me go ahead and share my screen because I want to make sure we have all the technical issues worked out. Let's see. Okay. Do you
We
see
can
it?
see your screen. Yes, thank you.
Okay, and I have the right presentation. Okay. All right, we're getting a good start. So first of all, what I would like to talk about is what the purpose of the meeting is from our perspective and our position. Okay, so wait a second. I'm moving forward is not working. Okay, I'll have to go like this. All right.
Kim, can you make it full screen? Do you know?
Yeah, okay, let me try that. I had this all practiced and was working before, but now that I'm on Zoom.
It looks fine. I mean, we can see your URL bar, but that's okay. We can just focus on the lower half. I mean, it looks
Okay.
fine. I think you also sent it to me in order to be able to share.
Well, one has narrative and one doesn't, so I have to work with this one, if you don't mind.
Okay, no problem. We can see your screen, so feel
You
free
can
to
use the plus
continue.
and minus buttons, and then to the right of the plus, that might be the full screen button to the right of the button. That
Okay.
right where the plus is.
Yeah, I got it. I'm
So-
at 100%. Okay. All right. So I want everybody to know that, our organization is our homeowners association has some reservations about this development, and we are not opposed to development overall, but what we are opposed to is unsafe, risky, and non-compliant development that has not been through a complete due diligence process. We are asking PPCC for your support in requiring that a full and independent EIR be required to move forward. So let's discuss the criteria. I'm not gonna go through all of them, but most of them. Complex projects. This project has very intricate mitigation issues, as illustrated by the complex issues for mitigating the landslide, the fact that it won't be completely mitigated. We have issues with water drainage, and we have issues with tapping into an old above ground source of water removal. We also have, the hillside is not just where the proposed partial stabilization is, it's all over. And we have lost areas in the area, and we also currently have a red tagged home recently on Positano. Sensitive habitats. The monarch butterflies have lost 98% of their population due to loss of natural habitat, due to development, and also to fires. Monarchs migrate through this area, and also they winter in our area, not just the landslide, but in all of Castellammare. This is controversial because of the fact that it's currently blocking a lane on PCH, and many people from many communities are very concerned about how this is going to be handled. Without the city of LA stabilizing the whole landslide from the top, Caltrans has indicated that they cannot shave the toe unless they change their position. But the slide has to be stabilized before any development can occur. And this is really the responsibility of the city of LA. And we have been waiting for decades for this to occur. I understand that Jeff Khau said they don't have the budget, but this is something that needs to be prioritized. From a legal perspective, the project size, the environmental impact, zoning issues, and the city granting use of the Toronto public right-of-way to the developer for a driveway is something that we highly oppose. This was retained by the city for access to fix the bulkhead and to widen Tramonto to the originally planned width of 60 feet, whereas you come off of the bulkhead, it immediately, spans out. Long-term, the city of LA has really abdicated their responsibility of stabilizing the slide, repairing the Tramonto bulkhead and roadway, extending Ravello and Castellammare to trust the developers to take on an city infrastructure project. This leaves our community with a mess and an inability for the city to come in and fix these items in the future. Items will be blocked. We won't have the proper drainage. And we are also concerned about the health of the bulkhead. And this was one of my questions. Sorry, let's move forward. If this project is allowed to move forward without an EIR, a dangerous precedent will be set for all communities. And I don't think anybody wants this who lives in our communities. So we're going to go on to Chris. So Chris, I'm going to get to your slides. Please go ahead.
Hi. For half a century, the city of LA has neglected to restore the city infrastructure and abandoning Tramonto and Ravello drives damaged by active landslide. The city has walked away from proper drainage and sewage systems, walked away from maintaining the bulkheads of Tramonto and Ravello. Study after study has occurred on this particular slide. It's the most studied landslide probably in all of California, from the Moran landslide study of 1958, and then the LA Commission, the URS stabilization study in 2010. But for over 20 years, nothing has been done. The hillside roads are broken and poorly maintained without a functioning drainage system. The hillside saturates from landscaping and heavy rains, sliding directly onto the PCH, causing mayhem. Countless projects for new homes have been abandoned and lots remain unusable. The city continues to avoid any responsibility of repairing these two important and tax revenue generating roadways. It can't be up to private contractors to develop or repair city infrastructure on public right of way. It's a conflict of interest, private profit over public good. The city has already been found liable for tens of millions of dollars paid out to red tagged homes damaged by the landslide. The PCH, if you see it, it's a hazard zone. A bicyclist was recently awarded over $9 million after being hit by swerving to avoid landslide debris on the PCH, the Tramonto landslide. Improving this project will expose the city to untold liability. It's not worth the risk. At least a proven environmental impact report and not cut corners, which is what has been happening so far.
Okay, so Marcia, we're on to noise and vibration.
Hi, thank you. Noise and vibration pollution are often underestimated. This holds true for this project's sound analysis report. In fact, the MND downplays construction noise, relies on incorrect source noise data, and omits off-site noise generation. Their report references average decibel levels. LAMC references maximums. Averages are several dB lower. dBs are measured logarithmically, so using an average over a maximum is a disingenuous measure. The project requires approximately 300 piles. Boring uses an auger drill rig, which is very loud. Approximately 3 piles can be drilled per day, and this will exceed the LAMC permissible noise thresholds. There is no quantitative analysis of vibration in the project study. However, construction rollers, caisson drilling, and loaded trucks will all produce ground-borne vibrations that will be felt throughout the community. Neighborhood ambient levels will increase. It is in no one's interest to do the wrong thing.
Okay, I think I've lost the slide. Does everybody see the presentation?
Well, we
No.
can see your screen. At that point, we could see your screen, not necessarily the presentation, but I mean, I, for one, was listening to Marcia and I understood what she was saying without a visual.
Kim,
Yeah, let me get, my apologies for the technical
problem.
difficulties.
the
Mark.
link is at the bottom of your, right below the photograph, and the password is horror story, capital H, capital S.
Oh, yeah.
And shrink your screen to 90% because we're losing part of it.
So
Okay.
Bob Young, do you want me to give you screen share? It sounds like you've got this thing on your laptop. No? Okay.
have
No
it?
worries.
Okay, just a second. I'm sorry. Let me get
I'll bring
this.
it up.
And I think we all remember that password. a few months ago, we got to see that video, and that was the password that sort of stuck with us.
I messed up when I was reading a chat and then I lost my presentation.
No worries. That's why I do try to warn everyone, the chat is not kind of an ongoing part of the meeting, because there's so much going on already in the meeting that it's difficult to monitor the chat. So
Yeah.
anyone dropping in the
My
chat, that's
error.
great, but it's not.
Okay, I'm going to go back to 90 where I started. And can you see my screen now?
Not yet.
Okay, let me share. Oh, I can't.
Most recently, just send it now.
Marcia, were you done, or did you still have a portion to go?
She was
Well,
done.
I can say something while she's looking for that.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Is that okay, Kim? Can I say my
Yeah,
thingy?
go ahead.
All
Go
right.
ahead.
Right there.
Okay. Decades ago, the Tramonto landslide was deemed in need of repair by geologists and city engineers. At that time, the city planned to stabilize the landslide, install proper drainage, rebuild and reinforce the Tramonto bulkhead. After years of inaction, the residents of Castellammare are now told a developer is going to fix the slide. This is unrealistic, classic passing the buck. Furthermore, the developers of this project are downplaying its impact to our community, including safety, in order to skirt many of the city and state laws. We should not forget that what we are discussing today is phase one of a larger project. A developer cannot be given the responsibility of taking on infrastructure projects the city has ignored. Further, the developer plans only to stabilize 1/3 of the landslide. A developer's priority is profit. Safety and security are secondary. Tramonto Drive is the main artery for over 400 homes, all located in a very high fire severity zone. Safety and egress are essential. This project is non-compliant on many levels. What happens in Castellammare will set a precedence, especially for neighborhoods like ours. Do not let the slick developer salesman influence doing the right thing. The city needs to stabilize the slide. The city needs to repair the road, and Caltrans needs to secure the toe of the slide. The city must follow the laws and the civic construction, which includes CEQA, EIRs, and LAMC codes. Failing to conduct a full EIR, relinquishing the PROW alongside a known landslide roadway, and passing the responsibility to a third-party entity such as a developer is unacceptable. The PPCC must continue, please, to support the residents of Castellammare in its appeal of the Tramonto development. It is essential that we stand together as a community and help to ensure our safety for future projects. We demand that the city remember its role, that they are in service to us, the taxpayers and the constituents. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcia. All right, Mark.
All right. We'll talk a little bit about hydrology. I'm deeply concerned about the proceedings with any development on this highly active landslide, which just a few weeks ago slid again onto the Pacific Coast Highway. I'd like to point out a notable aspect of the developer's scorecard is the supposed claim that the project would not substantially alter the existing drainage pattern, causing land erosion. The landslide stabilization study by the URS, commissioned by the city and Caltrans in 2020, found that a major cause of the Tramonto landslide is subsurface groundwater from stormwater runoff trapped between layers of fine sand. Further, the study clearly states in section 5.2 that while additional subsurface drainage will slow down the future landslide movement, it is not, I repeat, it is not an option for residential development on a landslide, and that additional structural support is required to meet safety standards. This aspect is completely unaddressed by the developer's plans. Their proposal has no mitigations for subsurface drainage, nor structural support to address hydrology, and is severely inadequate. The city should not have approved a geological study with insufficient hydrology considerations, and I urge the city to require a detailed EIR for this project and prioritize the safety of the citizens of this community and Pacific Palisades. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Okay. We are on to, just a second. Cindy.
Hi, I'm Cindy Young. I live adjacent to the Tramonto Slide and I'm very concerned about the amount of excavation proposed for this project. The grading proposal calls for the removal of 3 times the allowable maximum per project site, 10 times the limit of the city's baseline hillside ordinance. The applicant contends that 94% of it is remedial. While that may be true, we discovered that he wrote to LADBS inviting them to establish an order to comply on 2 lots, which were not considered substandard. This project will do nothing to stabilize the slide. The head of the city's own geotechnical engineering division wrote, and I quote, "There will still be the possibility of localized failures below and adjacent to the proposed development." 4 homes built on the bones of houses which fell in the 1958 landslide. I believe this project requires an EIR so that history will not repeat itself.
Cindy, quick question. What was the first, it's 10 times the limit of the hillside ordinance.
Hillside baseline ordinance, yeah.
Right, and what was the first one? It was how many times the limit of something?
It is 3 times the allowable maximum per project site.
Got it, thank you. Okay, next.
Michelle.
So this project poses adverse environmental impacts on biology, the impacts of which have not been analyzed or mitigated in the MND. And the project site has already been subject to unpermitted disturbances as identified by Coastal Commission staff. So the site is home, as was mentioned previously, home to monarch butterflies, which are a rare species under CEQA guidelines, the western mastiff bat, nesting birds, the lemonade berry scrub, a plant with a rarity ranking of S3. So the impacts on these plants, animals, and insects have not been analyzed or mitigated in the MND. Further, the MND fails to analyze environmentally sensitive habitat areas, which Coastal Commission says may exist on the site. So we recommend an EIR.
Okay, thank you. Mo, you're up next.
Good evening. Mo Sahibi, I'm a civil engineer. The drilling operation for the proposed piles against this fragile bulkhead, built hastily in emergency basis 54 years ago, will be perforating the soils on the slides. That would intensify its failure risk and potentially destabilize the westerly flank of the slide, subjecting hundreds of residents to unwarranted risk of losing their primary means of access to their homes with no plan B. The proposed driveway within the public right-of-way is in gross violation of LA City Municipal Code, Section 12.21 A4H, that states such access driveway shall be located entirely on the lot which it serves, and it is against the city policy requiring frontage street improvements consistent with LA City Mobility Plan 2035 standards. Thank you.
You know, this is important because this shows the deterioration of this is what the bulkhead looked like in 2005 when Cindy Mikowski was quoted as saying that the city is planning to replace the bulkhead, which consists of dated concrete pylons that currently support Tramonto. Design plans are expected to be ready by June, with the work to begin by next January. Obviously, that has not occurred. Okay, Carmen.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I know I'm going to reiterate what we've already talked about, but this is the community is really being impacted by this. As a result of the recent winter storms, the toe of the active landslide known as a Tramonto Slide has slid down onto PCH. The north right-bound lane is closed due to landslide debris covering the road. The closure of this lane is causing a traffic nightmare on an already congested highway. The proposed development is located at the very top of this active slide. Caltrans has advised that the unstable nature of the slide requires that the repairs start from the top of the active slide. The City of Los Angeles has jurisdiction over the entire area and must stabilize the slide before Caltrans can continue with repairs to the toe of PCH. The developer's MND indicates that the only portion of the slide that will be stabilized are the parcels on which they build the homes. Therefore, the balance of the slide will remain active. In 1958, the Via de las Olas landslide in the Palisades closed PCH and drew the City of Los Angeles into costly litigation. Now, the city is divesting itself of responsibility by selling substandard lots within the Tramonto landslide to a developer who plans to build without the benefit of an EIR. This is another disaster waiting to happen.
Thank you, Carmen. Okay, I'm Kim Feeder, and I'm going to address transportation and fire risk. And we had a professional transportation study completed on our behalf. According to the results of the transportation study concluded that an EIR needs to be required. The problem with the MND is that while, they have done their best to assess what is going to impact us and what is not going to impact us, the truth is that in most instances, the impact is significantly reduced to what other studies have concluded. So the MND stated that we will have less than significant impact to our community in emergency categories, multiple emergency categories. And in fact, according to the transportation study, we are facing a potentially significant impact to emergency response and evacuation. And LA law requires that when you have more than one, you just need one assessment in the MND that is not an ample assessment of the true risk, then EIR is mandated. So let's talk about heavy trucks. Heavy trucks and equipment are incompatible with our narrow roadways. The MND estimates that 6,800 truck trips hauling dirt will be required. That's in and out, so 3,400 in and 3,400 out. And I think that was based on 100 pylons, not the 300 we're talking about today. This does not include workers' vehicles, material delivery, and trailers hauling heavy construction vehicles. Now, here's something that happened just in the past couple of weeks. We had a heavy trailer coming up to pick up some construction equipment that needed to be removed from a site. And as you can see on Tramonto, they have completely blocked the area. This is another one with the One Coast developments coming up Tramonto from Los Leones. Again, this trailer hauling heavy equipment completely blocked the roadway, and residents could not get in or out. We only have two outlets, Puerto Marino and Los Leones, which exist for 400 plus homes and condominiums. Puerto Marina is effectively one lane, unusable for large trucks, and that includes fire. Fires come up Los Leones and Tramonto, which is the road we're looking at right now. Los Leones is our only two-lane access exit road and the only one accessible for trucks and fire trucks. A picture, here we are completely blocked. We are also, let me go back to 28, just a second. We're also in a very high, 28. We're also, why is it going to 30? Come on. Well, let me go the old-fashioned way. We're also in a very high fire hazard severity zone. And the truth is that in an emergency, in any emergency, even if a health emergency, let's someone has a stroke or had a heart attack, access will be impaired. This is according to the transportation study. Access will be impaired, response times will be delayed, and community evacuation will be adversely affected. In other words, if we have a wildfire in our very high fire hazard severity zone, the possibility of all of us getting out, we won't. All of us will not get out. So we implore that an EIR be done because the M&D has not assessed the impact from a safety and evacuation aspect correctly or adequately. Okay. So now we're going on to Flora. Thank you. Oh, no, that's not Flora. That's Rossi. My apologies.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Rossi.
Good evening. I do live on Positano Road, about 400 feet southeast from the project site. And that's an area that's been severed by the Tramonto Slide with only one outlet to Sunset Boulevard, actually. I just want to say that contrary to the developer's sweet assurances, this project is in conflict with state and local land use and planning regulations. It does not minimize grading, nor preserve the natural topography, and it will be detrimental to the community's safety and future development. Its scope is incompatible with the damaged and inadequate streets, and once built, will prevent the city from restoring them as they were planned. The road width deviation that is requested is currently asked for by 3 other projects waiting for approval past the Ravello pinch point. The cumulative impact will be a traffic and emergency access nightmare and endanger life and property. An EIR is absolutely necessary to properly evaluate the project and clarify the planning priorities. Providing 4 extra large luxury housing units should not precede restoring infrastructure and establishing and maintaining safety and access for all residents and landowners. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rossi. All right, Ivo. You
Hi.
there?
Yes. Ivo Vankov, licensed architect on behalf of the Lower Castellammare. The proposed development, its aesthetics and size are incompatible with the general zoning intent of the LAMC, the BHO, and violate the California Coastal Act 30251, 30253, A, B, C, and D. It would have a serious, possibly negative environmental impact, which has to be studied within an EIR. In fact, the entire MND fails to mention the California Coastal Act or the dual jurisdiction coastal location. And the CCC is not listed as a public agency whose approval is required. The development size resembles medium residential hotels, out of scale with the neighborhood. The public views from the proposed Ravello extension are blocked by a 200-foot uninterrupted building facade, where typical homes are approximately 50 feet wide. Said extension creates a major landform modification, a 2-story retaining wall in the middle of the street, cutting off access for adjacent landowners and preventing future reconnection of the road. I hope we all understand that Ravello will be impossible to reconnect with the proposed extension due to a newly created height difference. All in all, the development would be more than significant its impact, and an EIR by an independent, I underline, independent body should be mandated. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivo. Oh,
I'm here.
Marcia, thank you.
So I have a couple of things to say on this. So Mr. Russo commented on the fact that post-construction, if it happens, would reinstate Ravello to its current state. Currently at the pinch point, Ravello is 13 feet 4 inches wide, which is well below the state minimum for fire safety regulation of 20 feet. It also has a 12-foot dip, so that restoring it to its current level is something that would be well below state allowed standards for any circumstances. Further, absent from the MND is any discussion of the Ravello pinch point. This absence is in spite of the developer Greg Demos's own appeal to the city in October of 2021 that the city's inability to access and timely respond to a brush fire that starts on one or more of these properties could have a catastrophic impact on this area. Mr. Demos requested that the city restore this 200-foot section of Ravello to its intended public use. Mr. Demos requested that the city immediately perform the necessary inspections and analysis as required in order to determine and provide its opinion regarding whether or not the roadway traversing in front of 17464 to 17480 Ravello Drive is in safe and passable condition. Mr. Demos's letter concluded with an unambiguous request that the city immediately take the necessary steps to procure permits and perform the work and improvements within the right-of-way as required and as needed without stoppage or delay until this section of roadway is returned to its intended public use. This work has never been done. The excuse that it can't do it because that would mean there's no parking for the two properties at Ravello at the pinch point is not an acceptable argument. Furthermore, along the Hall, although the Hall Road has not been formally defined, there are only two roads. Dump trucks, cement mixers, and heavy other equipment accessing the construction site from Tramonto will demolish the flow of traffic as well as the stability of the road and the bulkhead. At a substandard width of 22 feet at the bulkhead, it is currently dangerous for two cars to pass, let alone pedestrians. With heavy trucks, it will become an impossible pinch point further, endangering walkers, children's pets, and construction workers, all trying to squeeze through this very narrow roadway. The need to limit building in sensitive areas is also an issue. The Brentwood Palisades Community Plan cites the need to limit building in geologically sensitive areas, limit grading on hillside communities, and avoid structures that are out of scale with existing buildings, which this project clearly does. The Tramonto landslide is clearly a geologically sensitive area. One 10,000 plus and three 7,000 square foot homes grouped together are clearly out of scale in an R1 zone community where the average size is approximately 2,500 feet and 34,000 cubic yards of grading requiring 49 truckloads over narrow streets is clearly an excessive use. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marcia. Okay, Bart.
Okay. Building huge luxury homes on an active landslide is a geological risk. Tramonto landslide has a long history of failure over decades and disaster. It's wiped out streets, sewage lines, and many homes. It's been moving, according to the Moran study, for 100,000 years. So this is not going to stop it. These large houses are not going to stop it. Both USGS and Caltrans geologists agree that this is a bad idea. This is a very active landslide. Major excavation and soil removal is very likely to trigger new landslides. Obviously, I'm concerned because I live on the edge of it and I've had landslides myself. So I have a great concern. Putting excessive weight at the top is a way to dump a huge slide onto PCH. Earthquakes initiate slides. Major faults are directly adjacent, the Malibu and the Santa Monica. The plan ignores the Moran study and ignores the URS study's drainage plan. Don Michael, who's probably the best known and most senior geologist in the area, claims that Stony Miller's recommendations are insufficient. This proposal makes it impossible to implement proper drainage in the future. You cannot install a hydrograph system once the houses are built. Why put us all at risk? Thank you. This is just an example of what happens when you build houses on an active landslide. It moves from underneath and it will trigger potentially a very large landslide, much bigger than we've ever seen. In terms of proof, I have been asking for 6 months now from the city of LA, their geologists, and with Jeff, I don't know if he's still on the call. The only proof I've been given is one coast, which I contend has caused a major problem for the PCH Sunset Building. I parked some old cars there, and it's ruined the foundation of that building. And the only ones that were sent to me recently are all new approvals here in our neighborhood to build on. I don't know if they're active landslides. There's a big difference between an ancient landslide and an active landslide, but none of the houses where I think there's 5 or 6 that have been approved, there's no proof that the new system, whatever they're proposing, is working. There's no history. They're not built yet. So I feel like we are a guinea pig right now that we're going to try doing this again. And I don't feel there's been enough study. We definitely need an EIR for this project. You know, this is a problem. There's a perception problem. And I feel that the city of LA is perpetuating it. And this is directly from Palisades Post. And Jeff is quoted here is saying that we should be assured that the project will still stabilize the slope bedrock by using caissons. Okay, we're not going to stabilize the bedrock using caissons. The caissons are going to be attached to the bedrock. He's kind of got it backwards, in my opinion. Taking swift action is imperative. This has been going on for a good 20 years, 30 years, 50 years. I agree we need to take action, but we need to take proper actions because it's going to take time to prove whether our solution is working or not. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take maybe a decade or 2, but we don't need another disaster. And I'm concerned the developer has no guarantee to uphold its claims. The city has a long history of abandonment of this neighborhood. Our streets are our storm drains here, and they're falling apart. You can't purchase landslide insurance. I hope everybody understands that they don't sell it anymore. You can't get it. So if we have a disaster, it's going to be a really serious problem. Thank you for listening.
Okay, I'm last. All right, so, oops, I want to go.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to talk about, again, I want to recap a lot that we've talked about, and that an independent and full EIR is a must. First of all, the tagline that I've seen a lot is taking action is better than nothing. And I don't think I've quoted it completely right, but this development is better than nothing. It isn't. It isn't better than nothing. It's going to create more problems, and it doesn't solve a problem either. It creates more problems. It's not going to stabilize the slide. Excavating and taking away soil from the slide is probably going to prompt more slides. I'm very concerned about the bulkhead. We haven't been talking about the bulkhead, that it is not anchored in bedrock. It's floating. Okay. So what is all this excavation going to do to our floating bulkhead? It needs to be anchored into bedrock before anything can occur. The city of LA really needs to take on that responsibility.
Kim, I want you to just be mindful of the clock.
Okay, I will. Thank you, Miriam.
Thank you.
This project is allowed to move forward without an EIR. A dangerous precedent is being set for all communities and especially hillsides. I don't think any of us want this. Why is the city approving with only an MND? I don't know. I can't answer that, but I think there's been a lot of misleading statements that have been trusted from the developers. And why do they not want an EIR? I can't answer that either. But what I do know for sure is that an EIR is required here. We need to conduct an EIR. There is too much risk to our community. There is too much risk to safety. There's too much risk to our evacuation safety in case of an emergency. And I know another thing. If an EIR is not required, not only does this not protect our community, but honestly, it doesn't protect the developers, and it doesn't protect the city. The developers and the city are opening themselves up to tremendous liability. And because this is an unsafe development, and it will result in tremendous suits against the developers and the city themselves. The way
Okay,
to protect
thank you.
everyone is to move forward with an AIR. You're welcome.
No, that was perfect. And your other speakers had made those points, so I appreciate it. Thank you so much. That was an incredibly well-organized, well-presented learning curve for us, and I thank you. All right, thank you for stopping your screen share. Steve Crone, who is the immediate past chair of our LUC, still a current board member and co-chair of our LUC, has had his hand up for a while. I'm going to call on him, and then Joanna Spack.
So I have a question, because I'm not here because I'm on one side or the other, but in listening to what Jeff Khau said, as I understood it, he said the city is not going to stabilize that landslide. Whether there is a building, the building project is accepted or not, the city is not going to spend $20 million to stabilize the lower part of the landslide. And I was out there with Murray Levy a year or two ago, and we walked around for a couple hours, and he showed me the bulkhead and all the slides and all the... What? Someone else is talking.
Someone unmuted and brought in some echo, but they're muted now. So go ahead, Steve.
Okay.
You were saying you
Anyway,
would.
so I went out there because I was concerned, and I listened to Murray, and I understand all of your concerns. I see it. But the question I have is, assuming Jeff is right, and I don't have any reason not to trust him, what are the options here? If the city is not going to stabilize that landslide, the lower part of it, then I feel sorry for all you guys, because I don't know what the choices are. If the city, and I believe him when he says they're not going to spend $20 million on this thing, I'm just not sure what other options there are. And I'm gathering that if it came down to the city saying, we're just not going to spend that money, not going to do it, I get the feeling that most of the people in that area would rather have nothing than to have this development go ahead. And that's not a great solution either, because nothing's been done on it. And we've had a landslide recently where the mud is down on PCH. So I'm like I said, I don't have a position in this, but I feel sorry for you. And I don't know what the solution is if the city's not willing to step up and fix it themselves.
So I don't know, Kim, if you want to treat that as a rhetorical question, or if you want somebody to take it. Throughout your presentation, you made the case that the city might be saying they're not going to spend the money and that they don't have the money, but that's a shirking of their responsibility, and that this is an infrastructure project that they should prioritize and they should allocate money to.
Absolutely. It should be prioritized. You know, the city's responsibility should not be abdicated to developers. Developers are not in the business of building infrastructure, you know, for city roadways, et cetera. And it should not be left up to them. Plus, it's not going to be fully mitigated. And in reading, I don't want to get into a lot of detail, but in reading the URS study, the shear pins that they're talking about using are not adequate also to stabilize the area, so to speak. And it just brings us more risk. This is not an option this is not better than nothing. Our position is it's worse.
All right, Jeff, you're still on the call. I realize you cannot speak for the city and see into the future to tell us whether or not they would allocate millions of dollars to, you know, do a project that impacts public safety on this westernmost corner or westernmost edge of LA City, but you are on the call. I mean, what is the narrative at the city? Just there is no money to shore up these kinds of hillsides. If we don't have a developer that can do it, we're just going to let it all, you know, cascade into the ocean.
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to a question about priorities. Right now, the city's main priority is housing and homelessness. And so, you know, any sort of money that the city would get would be like siphoned into those priorities. And so to make the argument that, you know, we need to earmark some dollars for remediation of a landslide, that can happen. You know, we can put in a motion for that to happen. We don't know how quickly the city can come up with money. We can get the ball rolling, you know, so it's really a matter of timing as well. you know, how fast these improvements can happen, how fast this remediation can happen. A lot of the remediation can happen due to as a result of this project, but I understand that, you know, there's more remediation that would need to happen in the future. At least, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm just looking at the clock. I just want to say, this idea that maybe there's a developer who can come in and remediate a portion of the slide and then others will do the same. What about the argument that it will take a lot of noise and vibrations, and in the process, does that jeopardize the rest of the slide in some way that's not being done right now? I mean, it's all dormant now, but with all the boring and the drilling and the hauling, does that sort of jigger loose the rest of the slide that's not being addressed?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of our main concerns is, you know, they can say, well, they're stabilizing their lot, but the impacts to surrounding lots and the impacts of construction and just the drilling and the boring.
Right.
Yeah, we want to know those impacts as well. And so, you know, that would be an argument for why an EIR would be needed, is to understand the impacts to adjacent lots.
Okay, great. Joanna Spock, Dixie, and then Murray. And I want to say, after Joanna speaks, I'm going to suggest that the neighbors have asked us to support something. Let's see if there is a motion to support that. But Joanna, I think it's always good to hear from you for sort of background and perspective. So Joanna.
I was just going to ask that, you know, obviously this project is going to be massively disruptive to the neighborhood, and it is just phase one of stabilizing this slide. It's only the 4 homes that we're talking about. I'm curious, because nobody's really mentioned it, how long this phase one is going to take. If you were given the approval to start right now constructing these 4 homes and stabilizing that portion of the landslide, how long is that going to take before we can then move on to the next phase?
Okay, so Tony or Greg, if you want to talk about phase one and just the amount of time that you think this all will take.
Can we define what you mean by phase one, the scope? Are we talking about the completion?
When I say phase one, I was talking about phase one being construction of these 4 homes, because the entire stabilization of the slide would involve more going on past these homes.
Yeah, phase one was a
So
term
just
that
our
was
project, Greg, how long will our current project, the blue lots in our slide, take?
I think the analysis had said something to the effect of 3 years is what the construction schedule was.
Okay.
But I would rely on the papers that we had filed, because I don't want this to create a contradictory statement, but I can say approximately 3 years.
Okay, we note the approximation. Thank you. Okay, so I want to say that before that, coming into this meeting, having heard a little bit about what had been going on, we had worked, so the president, the vice president of the PPCC, the current LUC chair, Chris Spitz, and the immediate past LUC chair, Steve Crone, had worked on a motion that we were going to place on the agenda for consideration. We didn't do that because we wanted the developers to be able to give their presentation without any preconceived notions as to where we were going to end up in on the other side, because I do think that the developers have set forth some great information here today and have definitely enlightened us all. I want to say that at the end of the residents, the HOA's presentation, they seem to be asking us to support a full and independent EIR. And they've made quite a great presentation. The head of our LUC is no longer on the call, but before she left, she did tell me that in her 17 years being on the PPCC, she has not yet seen a presentation that has been this informative and well-planned, well-presented. So I want to ask the board members if there's anyone here who would like to float a motion, and I'd rather it not be Murray, I'd rather it not be Cindy, I'd rather it not be someone who's involved with the HOA, but independent of the HOA, someone not from Area 1. Is there someone here that would like to float a motion for us to support, strongly support an independent, because we've already indicated we'd like it, but I think that we maybe need to talk about specific reasons why we'd like it. And I think some of those reasons have been laid out here today. but support for an independent and full EIR. Somebody want to make that motion?
I move.
Okay, great. So I've got Alan Goldsmith raising his hand. He is the at-large, I want to say, second alternate, makes the motion. Who wants to second it?
I will second it.
Aldous Topple will second.
Barbara Cohn seconds it.
I got you all. So Michael Edlin was the first one to speak up, and I've got Haldis and Barbara on the record as supporting. So that motion has been made. At the same time, I want to say that the developer has asked us to support the development. Is there someone who wants to make that motion? Board member? Raise your hand, please.
Hell no.
Okay. Not a voice call. All right. So the motion on the table is to strongly support an independent and full EIR. And it has been seconded. So any discussion at this point forward is towards making or defeating that motion. And Dixie, you have your hand up. Or Dixie, you had your hand up. All right, any other questions or discussion about this? The developer's still on the call. If there's any other questions, please raise your hands. Okay, Tony, you have the floor.
Yeah, I guess, you know, I know that there's being a motion on the floor. I just was curious if we would have time to kind of respond to some of the points.
Yes,
brought up
absolutely.
by
I
the
see Dixie's
HOA.
point again. Yes, absolutely. And you definitely have time for a rebuttal. I just procedurally didn't want to be discussing something that didn't have a motion, or at least get a sense whether or not there is a motion. Dixie, your hand is up again. I called on you before. Would you like to ask a question before I give the floor back to Tony and rebuttals?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
My name is Alan. I'm with Dixie here. We're using her computer. We live at 17712 Ravello Drive. I happen to be a geotechnical engineer of some 50 years of practice. Very interesting presentation. I appreciate the difficulty of the site. I have one concern, and I'm not for or against, but it's a technical concern. The real thing driving this landslide is groundwater. It's not surface water. It's not surface water control. It's groundwater.
Groundwater.
Sorry? I can't hear
There
him.
are people speaking over you, and I am muting them as I go. So please go ahead.
Okay. You know, it is groundwater. Stormwater we usually think of as stuff running over the surface. Groundwater is what infiltrates into the ground and destabilizes the hillside. So a solution to this hillside problem has to address groundwater, which is usually drainage. We see it in other locations on Ravello Drive. It's quite effective, but I don't see it as a part of this scheme. And I would urge you to get somebody who knows something about it and make use of it in your plan. That might be a recommendation for a part of the EIR as well.
Okay, thank you. All right, Tony.
I can actually chime in here and answer maybe one of the question from the last speaker.
Yeah.
When we,
I'll respond to the others.
excuse me?
I'm sorry.
And then I'll
I would
respond
like
to the
for
others,
everyone to please mute. I am continuously muting people, but there's really no reason for me to have to do that. I ask you to all please mute. If you're speaking, of course, unmute. But if you're just listening, please do mute. There's often background noise that's unnecessary. Okay, Greg.
So thank you for that last comment. When we came up with the slope stabilization design, we looked to the Moran report that was referenced earlier today by, I believe, someone in the CMHO in their presentation that was prepared in the 1950s. It's a series of reports, and we assumed the absolute highest historically recorded groundwater level to ever occur or theoretically occur on that site. So the shear pins and the loading that was accounted for in that design, again, assume the high groundwater level, knowing that a hydro-auger system is not allowed by LADBS grading. It is not an approved drainage device that LADBS grading would allow. We had initially presented a hydro-auger system. That's more of a redundant system. It's not something that they approved because hydro-augers can get clogged.
Okay, great. Thank you. Tony.
I was just gonna say, Michael Lyle had his hand up before the presentation. If he wants to talk, We
Yep.
should let him.
I see him. I'm looking at his square right now. I had told Tony Russo that he could make some rebuttals. I'm going to ask him if he'd like to do that or if he'd like for us to take Michael's question. Thanks, Beth.
You can take Michael's questions first. And then
Okay,
I'll
Michael
respond.
Lyle.
Oh, I just wanted to make a comment because while I live on Marquez Knolls, I've exercised on the steps up in your area very often. And I just wanted to remind you all, for those who don't remember, about a year and a half after the Northridge earthquake up in the Huntingtons, one afternoon at about 5 o'clock, the backyard of a home dropped off, and we just suddenly had a 30-foot pile of debris on blocking all 4 lanes of PCH. And it's a miracle that no one died in that, but it's just something when I look at this project and think about the mess that you have on PCH right now and what's up there and the work that needs to be done. If we did have an earthquake, which could happen at any moment, you would have a problem that's, makes what's up in Topanga right now look like a sandcastle. And that was all I had to say. And I wanted to say that to our gentleman from Traci Park's office, because we do really need the city to step up on this.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Tony.
Yeah, so just pull the screen back up. So I'm trying. I was writing a few things down. I'm going to try to respond as much as possible, but I hope that I get every point. I think what I was hearing a lot and what we heard a lot over the past years of these appeals is that there's this extreme concern about the landslide. That something needs to be done, that they want something to be done. They're asking the city to sort of do something. And what we're putting forth is trying to address a key portion of this remediation effort. I mean, I find it just so difficult when I hear of all these demands to do something, and then we put forth our plan to effectively remediate and stabilize these blue lots shown here. We don't own the green lots. The city owns a few, but not all. It takes cooperation with the city and the developers to address and fix this landslide. The city doesn't own all of these blocks, so there needs to be some concerted effort. And to think that the developer is just sort of planning, whatever they want to do, I think is losing the point here. All of these studies were extensively analyzed by the city. And when we talk about independent review, there was independent review by the Department of Building and Safety, by the Department of City Planning, by the Public Works Department, by Bureau of Sanitation. Like, there's all of these different departments that have to review the project independently to make sure that it's addressing some of the key concerns. And so I know I hear this kind of comment about, oh, we need to do an EIR, we need to do an EIR. I'm just curious what the expectation of the PPCC and really the community members is of this EIR. Because again, like I've described to you before and early in the presentation, that we've sort of done what needs to be done. You need to do environmental assessment. You need to do an alternatives analysis. You need to do the very thing. We've already done the very things an EIR would procure. So we waste time, do reports that we've sort of already done, reach similar conclusions, all to get to a same point where we are today, and further delay addressing a significant portion of the landslide and a key portion of it, which is the upslope portion that needs to be stabilized first. And so when I go through sort of their points about, about bio, they mentioned that our MND doesn't have this analyzed and we don't have mitigation measures. We did do this. We did a biological assessment from a qualified biologist. We have mitigation measures, 2-to-1 on-site and 2-to-1 off-site. We already have an off-site mitigation bank selected. Like, these are things that we've already done. And this is kind of part and parcel with some of the comments that we've received from this latest CEQA appeal that like the M&D doesn't include this or doesn't include that, which I just find very troubling. For example, the transportation study that they sort of mentioned, it has no quantitative analysis. It just talks about like general concerns, and they have these pictures that you showed about trucks blocking traffic. If we look at this, our sites are at the end of the roadway. There's no traffic coming through these sites. Once the trucks get to the project site, there's no other projects that would sort of come through. And so in terms of blocking traffic, you don't have that. And when we talk about like our transportation management plan, which is a part of the M&D that is adopted, there's already certain provisions that restrict hours. If there's work in the public right of way, there has to be there can be no work during peak traffic hours. There's conditions regarding flagmen. There's conditions regarding how traffic needs to be managed throughout each different construction phase. And there's details for how the project needs to park construction worker vehicles. There's all of this in the report. And so when I hear that there's nothing mentioned, it really does bother me a little bit, because we have done this and spent many, many hours doing it. With regards to the haul route, for example, our traffic management plan already accounts for a haul route, but what they might be talking about is the city approvals of a haul route, which goes before the Board of Building and Safety Commissioners. That step, that haul route approval cannot occur until after we complete the CDP environmental review process. So the next hearing that we will have as a project team is a haul route hearing with the BBSC, and then obviously hearings with the Coastal Commission. The idea that it mentions that we're not conforming to the code, I mean, it again frustrates me because it's not us saying this. This is the city saying this as well. The city has approved our reports. The city has confirmed that we conform to the BHO, the Bayside and Hillside Ordinance, and the required grading quantities, and confirms that this is remedial grading, the majority of which is remedial grading. That's why it's exempt from the BHO grading quantities. I can go into very, very, very clear detail as to how we comply with each aspect of the BHO, or else we wouldn't be here. We couldn't get to this point without that. And so I again come back to, what does the community expect from an EIR? What does the community expect from the city doing anything about this? If the city has to do all this construction, you're still going to have the same trucks. You're still going to have equipment. You're still going to have parking issues. For something to be done, construction needs to occur. And we believe that through our years-long analysis of these specific sites, that this is a clear improvement to the situation. And we genuinely are trying to get that message across, because we agree with the neighbors, like we really do. And so, I hope that our presentation, our analysis, and the details that we've expressed today will help, at least illuminate a little bit as to why we don't believe this is necessary, why the city of LA, city planning department, does not believe this to be necessary. They are the independent body as well. They're the ones that issued the M&D, not us. We prepared studies, but they're the ones that issued the M&D and published the M&D. I want to make that very, very, very crystal clear. So I really appreciate all of your time. I appreciate the neighbors' time as well. I think it's important to have these discussions and to really vet these issues. I just genuinely believe that our project team has vetted these issues. And we appreciate everyone's time.
Do I have a quick second for a quick rebuttal to the developers? 30 seconds.
Yeah, 1 second. I was just going to say, I appreciate that rebuttal. I think that part of it is, what I hear from the neighbors is that, Kimberly, you have your hand up. What I hear from the neighbors, Tony, is that up until this landslide, there was a sense that maybe the city was very happy to have a developer who's here and owns some property and can stabilize the hillside at their own cost. And so maybe an MND was encouraged versus an EIR because they were sort of eager to see you through. So I understand that you're saying that some of these some of the issues that might come up in an EIR have already been vetted, they've already been reviewed, they've been reviewed by various city agencies, and you've already addressed them. But I think with the hillside, cascading into PCH, I think it became more real to the entire community that this really is an active landslide. And so what I'm hearing is that everybody would like sort of all the elements to be in one independent study so that we can understand how they can be addressed and to be sure that they are in fact being addressed. But you're right, ultimately there will have to be construction, there will have to be boring. If this hillside is to be stabilized, there's gonna have to be hauling. It's not gonna happen with pixie dust. So Kimberly, I think you wanted to respond, and then Christopher, I'll give you the floor, but Kim had her hand up, and then I think we're gonna try to do some board deliberation.
Okay, I have a couple of things. First of all, I'm very sorry that Tony Rousseau is frustrated with the fact that we are demanding an EIR. But the reason is because what we have assessed with all of our experts in our neighborhood and experts that we have hired is the MND does not adequately address I have adequately addressed the risks to our community. I have read it myself. There is not one item in any category that is rated as potentially significant. Everything is no significance, less than significant, and it basically says there's no risk to the community. That is not true. Another thing I want to point out is that yes, there would be construction if the city did repair the bulkhead, did repair the roadways, etc. But we would be feel very secure with that kind of construction in our neighborhood, because we would definitely be repairing things that have been substandard for decades. And so this development also does not address other issues that are substandard in our community. However, the city came in, they would address everything. We would welcome the city to repair everything that has been neglected for decades. Please, Chris, go ahead.
Thank you so much. I just want everyone to understand that there's, these developers have, their intention is to develop their property, but it's not holistic, and there's a little bit of smoke and mirrors going on here, and you have to understand that when they say that the city has approved it, it's because they've gone to different. It's a bureaucracy. So you go to this committee and you come up with this, then you work them against this committee. So for instance, when the Moran study in the 50s, and he said, well, the water table, we're going off the water table of the 50s Moran study, we're in 100-year drought. Okay, so the water table going off that in the 50s does not show that the water table isn't going to go higher. That's like a once out of lifetime drought that's never been going to be replicated. The water table is going to go way up from that. So there's smoke and mirrors happening here. And when they say they don't have other lots, there's lots, they own a lot on the other side of the bulkhead. They're trying to buy that lot in the middle. They're putting up a retaining wall on the strongest side of the bulkhead. The other side of the bulkhead has 30 feet of exposed concrete. They're not touching that. So if you're drilling on the strong side and leaving like the exposed weak side open, that's not going to help anything. The city, we understand there's a lot of private property on this, but the public property are the roads. And the roads were designed to have drainage and sewage go through the roads, through Ravello, connected to the other side of Ravello, down to be drained. When the roads were broken, all the drainage was broken. And the city put temporary drains here, and there's a temporary drain going above the whole slide down to the PCH. And this whole project is going to dip into that drain. So there's a lot of like bubblegum and kind of look at here. And what we're saying about the city, no, they're not going to pay for it right now, but you have to fight them and eventually fight. And eventually the city has to do something, but
Right.
They're not going to do it unless that's the only option that they have. And they'll find the money, they have it, but it's cheaper to fight it until you eventually lose. And this neighborhood is going to keep fighting and keep suing and keep doing everything we can to make sure that these roads get reconnected and the drainage gets connected, because it's going to be an ongoing problem. And then all the lots can be developed, and then they could be multi-million-dollar houses generating tons of tax revenue. But until then, it's going to be lawsuit and it's going to be a disaster. So that's what needs to happen. And unfortunately, the process is that's the way this is set up. It's not against the developers. It's you know, that's what's happening. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I thank you all for your presentations. There is a motion on the floor. It has been seconded. Any other discussion, board members, around this motion? Okay, I wish to propose to you a draft that's been hurriedly put together, and let's see if this flies. So in light of all the factors that have been presented tonight, coupled with the inherent concerns that come with being a hillside neighborhood entirely within the very high fire hazard severity zone, with very few major arteries of ingress and egress, PPCC supports the appeal of Castellammare Mesa homeowners of the adoption of a mitigated declaration, with the adoption of an independent and full EIR, and urges City Council to require this environmental impact report. It is essential that this report be prepared by an independent, neutral, and experienced expert focusing on the geological instability in the area in order to examine and ultimately determine whether or not the Tramonto project will further stabilize the hillside, resulting in continuing slide activity or otherwise compromise public safety. So that is the motion. Any discussion, any amendments to that motion? Okay. I'm going to let you all know that I am going to make a friendly amendment that I will insert into that motion, the idea that the city step up to prioritize this and over some period of time carve out the money, whether it's in conjunction with the county and the state, to be able to address this hillside. But that'll be something I craft with all of you. Since the hearing is not going to happen tomorrow, and we will have potentially some time on the 23rd to perfect this motion. But in theory, all those in favor? Board members voting, and you'll all have to give me a minute to count this. Thank you, David Card. Alien, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This motion passes. 12, 13, 14. Whoa, hold on. 14, Andrew. 14. Elisa, will you give me a hand, please? Quentin. Oh, wait, I've got Cindy. Jenny. I just want to note, in case anybody's counting along with me, that Michael and Hall discount for 1 vote, and I am aware of that. So I just don't want anybody saying. Cindy Simon, hold on. I see you, hold on. Okay, so I believe this motion passes unanimously. Are there any abstentions? Everybody hands down, please. Let me lower all those hands. Thank you. Are there any abstentions? Okay, and is anyone voting against this motion? Any nays? Please raise your hand. Okay, this motion passes unanimously. Thank you, everyone.